Hello, and welcome to Part 2 of Writing Correct Sentences. This part is on the complex family of sentences. In the first part, which was on simple sentence family, we learned that a clause is a group of words containing a subject and a verb. In addition, we learned that there are two types of clauses: an independent clause, also called a main clause, which can stand on its own as a sentence. Further are dependent clauses. A dependent clause, which is also called a subordinate clause, needs more information to make sense as a sentence. In fact, the main thing it needs is an independent clause to stand with it. An example of an independent clause would be the cat slept on the rug, or, in the form of a sentence, capitalize the T and put a period at the end. And then a dependent clause might be after the girl lost her cell phone. You need more information. What happened after the girl lost her cell phone? Now, there are two types of sentences in the simple family: a simple sentence, which is one independent clause standing all by itself, much like the cat slept on the rug, and a compound sentence, which is two or more independent clauses properly joined. If you have any problem with any of this, please go back and review Part 1, which is on the simple family of sentences. Today we're going to talk about the complex family of sentences. Like the simple family, in the complex family we find two types of sentences. We find the complex sentence, and we find the compound complex sentence. Both of them contain two or more clauses. In the simple family sentence, if you'll remember, the simple sentence itself consisted of only one single independent clause. We'll look at these two sentence types one at a time. First, the complex sentence. A complex sentence consists of one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. This can be in a mathematical formula type style. Complex equals one independent plus one plus or one or more dependent clauses. For example, while the rain clattered on the roof, the cat slept on the rug. Can you find the two subject-verb pairs that define the clauses? Can you tell which clause is dependent and which is independent? Take a look, make sure you can find them. Here's the sentence again. Did you find the subject-verb pairs? Did you correctly identify the two types of clauses? In the future, I will be not specifically labeling the examples much as I did here, but I will be using the color code key, which you see in the upper right, to make it easier for you to go back and double check in your sentences. Note the comma between the two clauses. When the dependent clause comes before the independent clause in a sentence, they are separated with a comma. This sentence, of course, could also be written, the cat slept on the rug while the rain clattered on the roof. In this case, we wouldn't use the comma at all. This is because when you have an introductory element before the independent clause, whether that introductory element is a word, such as however, nevertheless, a phrase, such as in other words, or a clause, as it is here, it is distinguished from the independent clause by a comma. Remember, though, a complex sentence is constructed from one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. The previous sentence was simply one of each. Here's how the same sentence might look with a second dependent clause added. While the rain clattered on the roof, the cat slept on the rug, which was covered with cat hair. You notice there are two dependent clauses, while the rain clattered on the roof, and which was covered with cat hair. Make sure you can identify the two dependent clauses and the one independent clause and the three subject-verb pairs that define each of them. Notice that the two dependent clauses are quite different, but neither of them make any sense when read alone. Neither can stand alone as a simple sentence, whereas the independent clause, the cat slept on the rug, can. You can add as many dependent clauses as you like, but make sure that your sentence is clear and readable and that it has only one independent clause. That is, unless you want to use the fourth and final sentence type, the compound complex sentence. Before we move on to the compound complex sentence, I want to point out something very important. Unlike the simple family of sentences, where each independent clause is given equal weight, in complex sentences the writer is establishing relationships between the ideas in the different clauses. In the above sentence, the focus of the sentence is on the cat, since it is the subject of the independent clause. The dependent clause simply shows what else was happening at the time. The cat slept on the rug is the independent clause, the subject of which is the cat, and that's the focus of the sentence. If we change the sentence around and say the rain clattered on the roof while the cat slept on the rug, suddenly the cat is in the dependent clause and the focus is on the rain. By simply moving one word, the subordinating word while, and eliminating the comma, because now the independent clause begins the sentence, the emphasis shifts. It stays with the independent clause, which is now new, and which is now primarily about the rain. This is a very important point because as a writer, you don't want your reader to lose focus on that which you are trying to emphasize. Now, let's finally turn to the compound complex sentence. A compound complex sentence consists of two or more independent clauses, properly joined, and one or more dependent clauses. If we remember back to part 1, a compound sentence is two or more independent clauses. Here, that compound section is joined with a dependent clause, making it compound complex. That could be written in the formula CCX, or compound complex, is two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. Here's an example. While the rain clattered on the roof, the cat slept on the rug, but the dog howled loudly. Can you find the three subject-verb pairs that define the three clauses? And can you tell which clause is dependent and which are independent? Here is a sentence again, but I've used the color codes to identify the three clauses and the subject-verb pairs. Make sure that you see the two independent clauses, how they are joined, and the single dependent clause. Remember, a compound complex sentence only needs one or more independent clauses. Obviously, the writer is free to use many more dependent and independent clauses, as long as he or she maintains clarity and coherence and punctuates everything properly to help the reader straighten it all out. A sentence that is too long can confuse and lose the reader, so don't get carried away. Your purpose as a writer isn't to write long, fancy sentences. Your purpose is to express your ideas clearly to your reader. Sometimes that is best done with longer, more complex sentence, other times simple sentences. So now let me summarize what we've gone through very quickly in these two lessons on correct sentences. First, you have four basic sentence types. You have the simple family, which consists of two types of sentences. A simple sentence, which is one independent clause, or S equals one independent, and a compound sentence, which is two or more independent clauses properly joined. Again, for a discussion of the simple family and what properly joined means, please go back and review the first tutorial in this series, which is just on the simple family of sentences. We also have the complex family. The complex family consists also of two sentences. The complex sentence, which is one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses, and the compound complex sentence, two or more independent clauses properly joined, and one or more dependent clauses. These tutorials simply dealt with the types of sentences and how to write them correctly and how to distinguish them. There are a number of other things and points that you need to remember about writing effective sentences. Number one, there is no one best way to write a sentence. All 4 basic sentence types have their purposes, and it is up to the writer to use the most appropriate sentences for what he or she wants to say. The simple family of sentences is good for presenting information and for providing variety of sentence type and rhythm in a paragraph. The complex family is primarily used to present relationships between ideas and concepts. As I hope you can see, sentences can be short or long no matter which sentence type you use. Remember, back in part 1 of this tutorial, we built a very long, simple sentence with just a single subject and verb. It was one independent clause, but there were many modifiers. Understanding and mastering sentence type is just the first step in creating good writing. It takes practice and a lot of revising. Call me Ishmael. This looks like it would be very simple, and yes, it is a simple sentence, but it is more complicated than it looks at first glance. This is because the phrase, "you can call me Ishmael," you can is implied. This is what's called the imperative voice, when you're giving somebody an order. So the beginning of Herman Melville starts with a seemingly simple, but actually somewhat complicated sentence in terms of construction. There's one subject-verb pair, one independent clause, as I said, so it's a simple sentence. The subject and part of the verb, the helping verb can, are sometimes implied in informal diction, especially when using the imperative voice. Here's the opening line of 1984 by George Orwell. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. 2 subject-verb pairs, 2 independent clauses properly joined. That makes this a compound sentence. Here's Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. This is the first sentence, an extremely famous sentence. Usually only the first 2 clauses are mentioned. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was a season of light, it was a season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. This has 10 subject-verb pairs, 10 independent clauses, but it's still just a compound sentence. If you look closely at this, you expect that, this could be called a huge run-on sentence, and I suppose technically it is, because we don't have the use of either the coordinating conjunction or the semicolon to break it up into a, quote, correct compound sentence. Because this is just 10 equally balanced, evenly paced, independent clauses, it contains a lot of information. Now you can simplify this by note that this is actually 5 pairs of oppositional clauses. Because of that, if you added the final coordinating conjunction, if it was used, it would create somewhat grating intrusion. All of these independent clauses, and then suddenly, and it was the winter of despair. That would put too much focus on winter despair. The way Charles Dickens wrote it, each one is evenly balanced, each is equally simple and clear, and each is equally powerful, but they form a totality in that one sentence. It's a beautifully constructed, though somewhat unusual sentence. Here are some final reminders. Be ready to find and explain to yourself mistakes all around you. Not everybody uses the rules of punctuation. Each medium has its own restrictions. What we discussed in these tutorials was academic English suitable for your high school and college writing. And the final point is enjoy writing, and enjoy the infinite variety of sentences that can be found in the English language. This was the second of a 3-part series of tutorials on writing correct sentences. Keep watching this YouTube channel for the 3rd and final tutorial, which will be on finding and fixing broken sentences. Here I will go into more detail. If you have any questions about or suggestions for improving this series, feel free to email me at dbarkley@valenciacollege.edu. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial.